big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
So there's a ton of action happening across the NFL. Our last episode, which we recorded just under 48 hours ago, about 46 hours, and I want to say 40 minutes ago, the Bears had traded for Jonah Jackson. Less than 24 hours later, they trade for Joe Thuney. Trey Hendrickson's demanding a trade. Some giant NFL fan account on Twitter that I guess claims to brand itself as a credential page said that the Bears are all of a sudden in on Jamar Chase. A couple of veterans like Joey Bosa and Javon Hargrave being released. So, all these crazy storylines and some that are not so crazy sort of signal that the season is right around the corner, the opening of free agency. Welcome to the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. I'm Usayd Koshul. He's Nick Whalen. Check us out on Twitter @_Nick Whalen, @Usayd Koshul, and @Halas Beat. I don't know what to say, dude. I mean, you take the reins on this one here because there's so much to unpack.
There is. Let's start with the best news. And the best news is the Bears have a guard that was in the All-Pro each of the last 2 years, and Joe Thuney. And even better yet, he had some votes as Offensive Player of the Year. So he cost a 4th-round pick next year. Chicago doesn't have one this year. And he, I think, is 16 or 17 million. He's going to count against the cap. 32 years old. My gut tells me that they're going to extend him for, either 1 or 2 more years, probably roughly 20, 21 million per year. But I was jacked because our last pod, we talked about the Jonah Jackson trade and how it made sense. And, but now you have both guards essentially already done. And now I think I'm much more relaxed, man. Like, they have a handle on the offensive line. It's leaps and bounds better than anything that we've seen in, I can't even remember when, maybe the O-line for the 2006 Super Bowl Bears. And so I'm pumped about that. So I think that's where we have to start, because the Bears have a good O-line. You have to figure out center, which we can talk about, but they have 2 guards that have been to the Pro Bowl in the last handful of years, both on the roster.
Which is honestly super encouraging anyway. And, as we get into the Joe Thuney news here, I mean, when Diana Rossini tweeted that the Chiefs were looking to trade him, she kind of messed with everyone, because at the very end, it was Chicago's one of the teams that is called. And knowing the way that Ryan Poles operates, it is so interesting. I couldn't say this at the time, but I can kind of say this now. Ryan Poles has made a habit of every offseason, there's always at least 1 or 2 names that he sort of likes to sniff around in the trade market that are veteran players established at their positions that have maybe gotten that first or second sort of contract. And so then the reality of it all sort of becomes, if the deal is willing to be made, then a deal can be made. And again, let's call it how it is. This is a 2026 4th that the Bears gave up for Joe Thuney. This is a pick that it's I start to look at and I'm like, well, you don't really know what next year's draft is going to look like, just top to bottom. You know for a fact that certain positions with the trajectory of the Bears, let's just say they aren't picking in the top 20 next year, they're not going to have a chance at landing some of the top guys, right? Because next year's draft does project to be very much a playmaker heavy draft, just all across the board in terms of skill guys. And so now it sort of becomes a situation where it's Ryan Poles was all right, you know what? I tried to a few years ago trade for a certain player from Kansas City that we didn't end up getting. And this was a star player, by the way. I'm not going to mention the name just because, which I'll tell you after the show. But, and sorry to tease all our listeners, but it is what it is. But now it's a few years later, he has kind of kept in contact with the Chiefs, and it's been hey, if you're willing to move someone, we'll take him off your hands. And really, you look at this from the Chiefs' perspective. They moved on from Joe Thuney. They got Kingsley Sumatea, right, who I think has a lot of potential, 1st-round pick from a few years ago. But they also release guys like Charles Omenihu, and they're not bringing guys like pass rusher Charles Omenihu back, which really to me signals from a Kansas City perspective that they recognize that even though they got to the Super Bowl this year, it was the worst Chiefs team we've seen in years. And so now the reality of it ultimately is that it kind of turns into a situation where they are ready to reload for 2026 and 2027 and well beyond that. They're always going to be relevant with Patrick Mahomes as quarterback, but they kind of feel like the 2012, 13, 14 Green Bay Packers in a sense, where it's like good quarterback, but like roster wasn't in the best shape. And so you're kind of stacking draft picks and getting whatever it is you can.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's interesting because some people understood why they had to get rid of him. But the risk for Chicago is, let's say he takes a step back, right? That's the risk. I mean, he doesn't miss games. That's the good news. I mean, not that he can't, but he doesn't typically. It's money. And so let's say he's an above average guard next year. He's not all pro. I'll take that. That's still good. And so the other thing that, besides Thuney, so by the way, just a quick scouting report, y'all, Thuney's not your huge, massive mauler guard. He's more of a technician. He's very smart. And when he loses slowly. So that means like, okay, I'm not winning, but I'm not going to give up pressure to the quarterback. And so he's someone that helps out everywhere along the line in terms of he can play anywhere, but he, in terms of a guard, has the awareness to pick up blitzes, to help the center, to help the tackle, etc. But you're also getting, y'all, a 6-time Super Bowl appearance offensive lineman, 4-time Super Bowl winning offensive lineman. He played with Tom Brady. He played with Patrick Mahomes. Now he plays with Caleb Williams. Maybe he has some help and insight there. Also, the thing that gets me excited, maybe our next topic is talking about center, but when he got to Kansas City, his first year was actually Ryan Poles' last year in Kansas City. They also brought in Creed Humphrey. Creed Humphrey was a second-round pick, started from day one, and he helped mold him into, I would say, the best center in the NFL. You could argue top 3, whatever. But he also helped mold Trey Smith. So he's a guy that when he's on your team, good things happen around. So that's speaking of leadership, that's talking to. He's been to the playoffs a bunch of times. You could say the same thing with Jonah Jackson. They went to the NFC Championship game with Detroit. They should have beat the Niners. So you're bringing in to your line that's normally young, right? Darnell Wright, Braxton Jones, they don't know a ton about winning in the NFL. You're bringing in 2 established veterans that have won, and one that has been around the best quarterbacks, arguably, you could say ever. Those are the 2. They're talking Mahomes is going to be there. Then there's Brady. I can't think of a better offensive lineman to bring in just for your culture and your locker room.
Yeah, those are some excellent points. I mean, I was, as you were speaking in that last segment, I did a little bit of research. I mean, I think if you ask a lot of the older Bears fans, like, hey, give me a Bears O-lineman in your lifetime that was a first-team All-Pro. You're going to hear your names like Bill George, Clyde Bulldog Turner, depending on the era. But just doing some research real quick, and I think the last time the Bears had like a lineman that went to the Hall of Fame was Jimbo Covert, who was part of that 85 Super Bowl team. But get this, the last time the Bears had a first team All-Pro offensive lineman. This is first team All-Pro offensive lineman.
Can I guess?
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
Is it Reuben Brown?
It is not Reuben Brown.
Because I think back to that team is like the best team. Then I'm going to go Olin Kreutz.
It's not Olin Kreutz, actually. According to Pro Football Reference, it is Jay Hillenberg, who was named a first-team All-Pro in 1988, 1989, in back-to-back seasons. And so the point here is you talk about like, okay, well, 32 years old, Joe Thuney he's going to command a contract extension. When this trade went down, I was like, all right, so he's already going into the last year of his deal. If the Bears can hold on to 10, if they can hold on to 39, 41, and 72 in this deal, because when the trade went down, I was like, 10 may be a little too rich, but I wouldn't be surprised if 39, 41, or 72 gets moved. They actually gave up way less than I thought they were going to, but you just look at the whole situation and you're like, okay, this is a team that it's like they really haven't had a lot of like top tier caliber offensive linemen, and Joe Thuney's here to change that, like, for good.
Oh, 100%. And it's, I mean, the downside is so small. Here's the other thing that happened today that I thought was interesting and put into context for me is free agency is going to get wild, in my opinion. We saw today Tutu Atwell, who was a guy I thought the Bears could actually look at as like a speed guy, re-signed with the Rams 1 year, $10 million. That is a massive overpay, in my opinion. And the Bears have two linemen that have made the Pro Bowl the last 5 years, as I said, for 17 each. I mean, I can't even imagine, Usayd, what Tevin Jenkins and Aaron Banks, like the rumors of the money that they're going to get is so high that I think trading for these guys while under contract, you can extend them if you would like, but they're still locked in for that salary that they have now for 17 is a steal. I know like Jonah Jackson didn't work out last year. The more I've researched that, he didn't work out because he was playing center out of position, but at guard, he's been very good. Brandon Thorne, a guy I highly respect. He has him as like a top 7 type guard when he's healthy. And obviously he loves Joe Thuney as well. So you got those guys at a bargain. And I think, man, next week, starting this free agency, it's going to get so crazy with money with the salary cap getting bumped up as well that Ryan Poles and company's like, hey, if we trade for these guys now, we don't even have to get into that crazy market.
Yeah, and on the subject of a guy like Aaron Banks, I mean, I saw something today where the report was like, okay, well, he could make anywhere from $17 to $20 million a year. Like, I will be honest, when he was coming out of Notre Dame, I was like, all right, Aaron Banks is a guy to watch, but that was Aaron Banks, the rookie. Now you're talking Aaron Banks, the established NFL veteran that's played a lot of football that I look at and I'm like, all right, well, is he a tier 1 option for me in this class? Not really. He'd be more so like a tier 2 option for me in terms of free agents. Like, he's the type of guy where it's like, that his name's going to be hot during year 1. But then during the first wave of free agency. But then you also look at it and you're like, well, once that first wave passes, come like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's really when I think that he should end up being signed, when the start of that second wave really is. But it just speaks to the Bears are operating with such a high level of urgency here with both of these moves. Now it provides you a lot more flexibility in the draft, just because now it's like, well, you don't have to go with an offensive lineman at 10. You're also not doing what the old Chicago Bears would have done, which is bank on a highly coveted draft prospect falling to you. You're instead saying, now we're forcing other teams around the league to have to change up their approach because of the moves that we've made.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also Aaron Banks, do you want to guess where he ranked among guards according to PFF last season?
Probably bottom half.
He was 50th.
Okay.
So like if he's getting 17 to 19, which I think is what the report said, he's a bottom 15, right? So if you go 32, y'all 64 total guards that start, he'd be the bottom 15 guys, and he's getting 17 to 19 million a year. And the Bears just got 2 guys for 17-ish that are much better than that. So I'm pumped about that. I think we should transition to center because we're talking O-line. I came out with a little bit of a hot take today. And to be honest, I stole some of it from Brandon Thorne. Respect him a ton in terms of being an offensive line. That's his niche. And if you guys have not followed him, follow him online. He's got his Trench Warfare. If you guys want to subscribe to a O-line like newsletter and studies and videos that he does, you will have to pay for it, but he very knowledgeable. There's a report today from, I don't know what it was, 49ers fan club / ESPN, whatever it was, that the Bears are going to offer a massive deal to Drew Dalman, the center for the Atlanta Falcons. Drew Dalman is the guy, after Trey Smith was franchised, everyone loved Drew Dalman. I mean, it was like Drew Dalman was going to be the next like offensive line, like Messiah-like guy for the Bears. And I'm like, Drew Dalman is a good outside zone blocking center, but he's not a big guy. He kind of reminds me of like Coleman Shelton, but a very good to elite run blocker. That's kind of what he is. He's a average to maybe negative pass blocker. He's not going to be great in terms of like duo power, like downhill stuff. He's a good center, but Brandon Thorne actually said he would not like reset the market for Drew Dalman. He actually doesn't even have Drew Dalman as his top interior offensive lineman that's available. So taking Trey Smith out, he's not even his top guy. And so that's one of those things where I would rather Chicago put their efforts towards getting a defensive lineman, which we could talk about in a bit, in free agency and going a different path for center versus breaking the bank on Drew Dahlman. Because I'll be honest, man, spending the money is fine because we have it, but spending almost $50 million between guard, center, guard, it has me a bit concerned.
Yeah, fun little fact here, because I know people on Bears Twitter will kind of dig up anything. Drew Dahlman went to the same high school as former Bears quarterback David Falls, if any of you guys remember him from that 2010 team. So that for sure has to mean he's a Bear, right?
David Falls. Lefty, right?
Yeah, lefty, I believe. Lefty, I think the last Jerry Angelo draft or like the second to last Jerry Angelo draft.
Was he like San Jose State or something like that?
He was, yeah, San Jose State. So he was the first Mark Trustman draft. That's what it was. But okay, so we'll talk about Bears history when it's slow. But anyways, okay, so here's the thing. The issue that I have with Drew Dahlman is we've talked about the size already, but then it's like, let's call it how it is, right? Like Joe Thuney's not the biggest guy either, right? Jonah Jackson, not the biggest guy either. This makes me wonder if the Bears are going to, on purpose, because a lot of the two tackle sets that Ben Johnson likes to run, if Dan Skipper is now vaulting to the top of the board, like when free agency opens next week and we're talking offensive line, go out there, your first signing needs to be Dan Skipper, right? For an ultimately team contract. Yeah. But getting back to Drew Dahlman here, it's kind of interesting to me because I'm like, do you really bring in are you going to bring in a player that you know for a fact doesn't necessarily fit the type of scheme you're going to run and hope it works out? Or are you so convinced that you traded for Jonah Jackson, Joe Thuney, and you're going to sign Drew Dahlman to a big deal? And you're so convinced that these guys can help your offensive line take the next step. Like, to me right now, I think the Bears are leaning with the latter one and saying we are going to pay Drew Dahlman whatever it is that he wants in order to bring him in. Because at this point, if you're this team, like, you really haven't had a consistent center since the Cody Whitehair days. You also really haven't had a consistently good center since the Oil and Crude days. And so then it just kind of becomes this situation of like, you know what, let's just go ahead and pay a guy as much as we can because we don't want to sit there and wait for a guy to draft and develop. And quite frankly, the University of Iowa kind of being in the Bears' backyard. I mean, they're sending Connor Colby and Logan Jones to the draft this year, but none of those guys are going to be ready to start on day one for the Bears. So there's that.
So here's the part where I understand both sides of it. If the Bears sign Drew Dahlman, I'm not going to be like mad. I'll be like, okay, but I just don't think it's necessary. Nor do I think he's going to be exactly what Bears fans think. Like Brandon Thorne, again, referencing him, he said that the Falcons like hit him some because like he has his strengths, he has his weaknesses. And so I just think people see like, maybe metrics on PFF and they're like, this guy's flawless. Well, like the Falcons have a great O-line, but they also run a ton of outside zone, more than anybody by a mile. They could go so many other ways at center, y'all. And when you have Thuney and Jonah Jackson, hopefully they both stay healthy. I don't know that you need this huge, amount of money at center. I mean, we just talked about Joe Thuney helped develop Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey. Like, what if they trade up from 39 and they get Gray Zabel? Or they wait a little bit and they take Jared Wilson and they're like, hey, you know what? These two veterans right here, they're going to help and they'll make the calls so the rookie center doesn't have to. And then they can all kind of grow together. Or they could take a 1-year flyer and still draft a guy to develop on like Ryan Kelly or like an Evan Brown. To me, like, I just think financially, I would rather put more into the D line than a center. It feels a little overkill. And plus, I just don't know if he's going to necessarily be what people think. I'm not going to hate it. I just, in terms of resources, I would like a different strategy more than pay Drew Dahlman $15 million plus per year.
Yeah, and okay, so I did some research earlier today as well. I went back and looked at some numbers from Drew Dahlman plus Gray Zabel from when both these guys were at the scouting combine. So it's funny, right? Because it's like players do get to the league and get bigger, faster, and stronger. Now, Drew Dahlman, according to his NFL.com draft profile, was 6'3", 295 coming out, right? Like his athleticism score was a 68, which ranked 6th amongst centers. All right. So you're talking about there like a above average center. Got it? Or just like average middle of the pack center, because the other big trend that I think is taking place in the league nowadays is teams are saying, well, forget drafting a guy that's only going to play center. Let's take a guy that played guard in college, make him a center. CC the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who did that with Graham Barton, who played guard at Duke, is now going to be a really good center. So Gray Zabel, though, on the other hand, comparing him to Drew Dahlman, is 6'6", 312, 32-inch arms, about 9.5-inch hands. And then among offensive tackles, his athleticism score was an 89. And his overall score at the combine was an 87. So he was pretty much, and his production score was a 91, right? According to the next gen sets. So he was pretty much first or second in every single category. And so you talk about a guy that has kind of come in and really that is going to make the Bears sort of decision more difficult, right? Because like I look at Drew Dahlman and I'm like, the guy is a bit of a technician. He has always sort of been a pretty solid player. He's risen from 4th round pick to pretty much about to get paid here in free agency. But I also look at it and I'm like, well, is he really the right move to make? And could a younger guy like a Gray Zabel possibly be a upgrade in the short term and in the long term?
Yeah. And the thing that I brought up today, and this made people like really upset, but I'm just honest. They have Ryan Bates at $4 million on the team, who took snaps at center, arguably could have been center, but injured last year. If he was not in the plans, I think he would have been cut already. They would have injury settlement him or released him and saved $4 million. So to me, like, I think that's your safety plan. Like, if you don't get what you want out of this, you can still bring in Evan Brown as, competition, or Zabel or Jared Wilson, or Wyatt Millum is another one that I like as a potential like draft and develop type of guy. But I don't know, like where does Ryan Bates go now? Like, if you $4 million for backup guard seems a little expensive, but I mean, if you're going to draft some more kids, like it seems like he's gone, but he could be your security blanket at center.
Yeah, he definitely could. And you mentioned some other names like Evan Brown. I mean, this really gets me thinking with some of these other veterans that weren't expected at the open market, but are now on the open market. I mean, do the Bears sort of become a hotbed destination for some of these vets that are looking to win now? Right? Like, you've got your obvious ones like a running back in Jamal Williams, who has the connection to Ben Johnson from their days in Detroit. Then you've got Durham Smith, who was signed today, who overlapped with Ben Johnson when Johnson was the, I think, assistant receivers coach in Miami. Yep. Also overlapped with Cole Kmet when they were at Notre Dame. But then it's like, is Durham Smith, because he's only on a 1-year deal, is that really worth it? Do the Bears say, hey, we want to bring in even more competition and even more seasoned vets, bring in a guy like an Evan Ingram? Then all of a sudden, could a player such as Javon Hargrave or Joey Bosa make sense? So, or even one of these younger guys like a Charles Omenihu. So it's really this situation to where it's like free agency for the Bears just got a whole lot more complicated, because yes, the Bears have the money to sign a whole lot of guys even after the Jackson and Thuney trades. But then you don't want to put all that money in one place. You also want to make sure you have enough money left over to start extending guys like Kyler Gordon. Right.
The interesting thing too with that, like, let's say they do sign. Let's say they sign Ingram because Ben Johnson likes 2 tight end sets, and Durham Smith can be like the tight end 3, and they get either Javon Hargrave or Joey Bosa, right? Like that's what they do. They don't go out and they don't sign anyone else in free agency, at least in the first wave or two, and then they build through the draft. Well, then, y'all, the Bears, for the first time in, I mean, my goodness, man, I can't even remember, would get compensatory picks for Tevin Jenkins and anyone else that leaves, because they didn't sign anyone that would cancel anyone else out. So then they could start playing that game where you're signing people that were released. They don't count against that formula, everybody. So to me, I think that could be not a bad strategy where they turn into like trading for guys and signing guys that were released. And that way you're constantly replenishing picks, and then you're taking more chances on depth. And then you could find more draft and develop type players down the road.
Yeah, and again, with the comp picks, I mean, the big thing to really understand there is it's like, if you play your cards right, that's like free draft picks right there. is pretty much what it is. And what's so interesting about these guys like Javon Hargrave and Joey Bosa, I mean, we know what Joey Bosa is at this point. He is very established, obviously one of the best Chargers to kind of ever play. But then you start to look at Javon Hargrave, and again, you're getting a guy that's been in the league for whatever, 8 to 9 years now, going to be going into year 10 next year. Kind of had some really good games in Pittsburgh, really good run in Pittsburgh, but everything just seemed to pop off as soon as he went to Philly. And even though, again, he was 30 years old back in 2023, I mean, he still had a really good season. And even though he was injured this year, I mean, managed to really produce. And so it really becomes this sort of thing where it's like a guy like him that has 45.5 sacks is going to command a lot of double teams and is going to go ahead and has clearly proven that, hey, I may be on the open market, but I'm not slowing down anytime soon. Like, give me that big contract, watch me go out and play. And he's the type of guy that I look at, I'm like, makes sense for, if there's any defensive lineman I'd want the Bears to sign to a Gervon Dexter and to take the pressure off guys like Andrew Billings, it would be Javon Hargrave. Like, if the Bears got a solid interior where it was Montez Sweat, a solid D-line where it was Montez Sweat, and then a good interior where it was Gervon Dexter plus Javon Hargrave, but that meant not signing guys like Chase Young or Khalil Mack, I would honestly do it, because then you have a 1-2 punch inside. And again, that other edge rusher you could figure out through the draft, or Austin Booker.
No, 100%, because honestly, the interior O-line, as we're finding out, y'all, and interior pressure matters more, because if you get pressure on the outside, it's great, but if the quarterback can step up and they have space in the pocket, it doesn't really matter what that pressure is off the edge. So I honestly would love for them to sign a veteran defensive tackle, like you're saying, let's say it's Hargrave, and then still on day 2, grab one of these defensive tackles. So that way you have 2 young guys with Dexter and whoever you draft. Then you have 2 veterans in terms of Billings and Hargrave. And then you can keep rotating that through the years and have this. People mention it all the time. Look what Philly did. Philly had it was like hockey lines. It's all right, line 2, get in. Like they're changing them up all the time. So you want that on the inside and on the outside. And so when you do that and they're fresh, they perform better. You have better matchup that you can take care of, but also injury, like security there. So I love that idea. I've got one more, man. One big idea before we head out here. I don't know what else you have, but some news broke today that there's a certain pass rusher I thought should have been Defensive Player of the Year this year. I thought he got hosed. Trey Hendrickson has been granted permission to seek a trade out of Cincy. Cincy has just put their head in the sand and decided they're going to run it back how many years in a row, and they're just going to have 2 receivers and a quarterback now, because that didn't work last year, even when you had Hendrickson getting 17.5 sacks, and they're going to let him go. Okay. Trey Hendrickson has had 17.5 sacks, y'all, 2 years in a row, which is insane. He's 30 years old. I put a trade on Twitter, and I had probably just as many people saying that's a stupid trade, and they didn't like it. And a bunch of people said, yeah, that's fair, or I like it, which means it's probably somewhere close. Jonathan Wood said he kind of looked back at what the Khalil Mack trade was when the Bears traded him away to San Diego. It was the 48th, I think, overall pick. But at that time, Mack clearly wasn't producing like Hendrickson has been. So it's probably going to cost more than that, probably somewhere where it's a early 2 plus something or a late 1. So here's what my idea is, man. And I'm going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone with this one, Usayd. The Bears give up 10. They give up 39. And they give up 72. Okay. They get Trey Hendrickson, and they get 17, and they get 49 back. So basically, they move down 7 spots in the first, 10 spots in the second, and they give up a third. And my idea with that is this isn't a super strong draft class, y'all. So we're not giving up a pick. We're moving back a little bit in round 1, which I think a lot of people want to trade back anyway. And you move back a little bit in round 2, which I don't think misses out on a ton. And you give up 72. And my thought is, let's 2 birds with 1 stone this one. You move back from 10 to 17. And at 17, you take Gray Zabel. And that way you have your center, right? The money you were going to spend on Dahlman, you spend extending Trey Hendrickson, and you have an elite edge rusher out there. Then you still could get Javon Hargrave, right? And you have crazy good D-line. And then you get your center, who could be maybe your next Creed Humphrey, that Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson can help develop. And you have a very good athlete on the inside that you said. What do you think about that?
I love the idea, and let me just say the perks of this thing is that the Bears still have 2 picks inside the top 45, right? Which is because you have 17, then you have 41, right? Now, that to me still really works out because it's kind of just like...
and 49.
Oh, and 49, that's right. Yeah, so you basically...
3 in the top 50.
You get 3 in the top 50, so it actually ends up being a pretty good deal for the Bears as well. And then you get that stud edge rusher. You know, but I think part of me also here, and this is the last thing I'm going to say too, is that as much as I want the Bears to trade for Trey Hendrickson, if it's under the context of the trade details that you described, I am pulling the trigger 11 times out of 10 if I'm Ryan Poles and I'm Ben Johnson. But then I also look at it and I'm like, okay, since he starts asking for, let's just say, 2 first-round picks plus 1 of the second-round picks, then it's like, yeah, I'm not doing it. And the reason being is because I don't want history to repeat itself. Like, as much as I love Khalil Mack and I enjoyed interacting with Khalil Mack when he was here, the reality of it for me was also this, is that you could just tell that that was a move at the time that was a mistake. Not because the Bears didn't have the quarterback, but because after that 18 season the Bears had, and then that 19 season the Bears had, it kind of sort of became this thing of like they could have really used those draft picks to help reload the roster.
And that's the thing with this is you're really not killing your draft capital. You're giving up 72. It's really just the money, and they already have the money. And so the other thing with the money, y'all, is they spent some with Joe Thuney, spent some with Jonah Jackson, right? They've re-signed Josh Blackwell and a few other guys here, right? Is that when you have a rookie quarterback on that rookie contract, that's the time to hey, we're gonna press on the gas and we're gonna push while we have this huge advantage. And having arguably the best defensive player in the NFL, one of the top 5 easily defensive players in the NFL, added to your team, and really it's going to cost you a couple of trade downs and 72 and some money. That's going to make, you talk about that domino effect, right? That's going to make Montez Sweat better. That's going to make Javon Hargrave, if you bring him in, Dexter better. The secondary isn't going to have to, hold up as long. Like, it's going to create better field position. Like you keep looking at how it's going to help. It's like, that makes a lot of sense. If it's, hey, we have to have 10 overall to get Trey Hendrickson, I'm out.
Yeah, that I'm not going to do. And speaking of getting out of here, all right, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Usayd Koshul @ Nick Whalen. Check out the Halas Beat on Twitter as well at Halas Beat. Make sure you are subscribing to the podcast as well as the YouTube channel. Whatever format you guys prefer will be there for you. And then check out the Bear Report website as well. A lot of really good stuff dropping. We're going to have a roundtable here in a few weeks, or a few days, I should say, regarding free agency. A lot of really good prospect interviews dropping as well. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your week. Have a good weekend, and bear down.